Welcome to Session 6. This is our last time together, but really it's just the beginning of your R12 journey. Our dream is that you'll experience true spirituality like never before, that you will follow Jesus on the path of surrender, of separation from the world's values, that path of a sober self-assessment, of serving in love, and then finally of supernaturally responding to evil with good. And by the way, before we get started, last time we asked you to do a little assignment. We asked you to get together as a group and find either a person or a group that had a real need, and then in a tangible way as a group to love them, to give, to serve. How did that go? And if you're just in the planning stages and haven't done it yet, let me encourage you. Few things build authentic community than doing something outside the group, something bigger than yourself. You know, maybe you can all get together and just say, hey, we'll take over the nursery for a week, or let's clean a widow's yard. Do something that you really love people in a real specific way. And I think you'll find that some great things are going to happen. Well, today's session we're talking about how to overcome the evil that's aimed at you. And if you've been on the receiving end of a raw deal, maybe someone walked out on you, maybe you got laid off unjustly, you've been passed over for a raise, or maybe you find yourself in a situation where, as we've talked about this and you've gotten close to people, some memories about being abused or some tough times you've been through, this one's for you. Few things will communicate the power and the reality of the gospel of Jesus Christ like when we respond to evil with good. In fact, let's look at the passage together. The Apostle Paul writes to the church in Rome, "Do not repay evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, 'It is mine to avenge, I will repay,' says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good." I mean, listen to that. Don't be overcome with evil. Overcome evil with good. And I have a confession to make. The first time I read this, I didn't grow up as a believer. I had not read the New Testament. I thought to myself, where did they get these crazy ideas? I mean, my dad was a boxer, he was a Marine, and he taught me as a kid, even though I was kind of small, when they hit you, what you do is you hit them back quicker and harder and better. What do you mean, don't repay evil for evil? Don't take your own revenge. Let me tell you a story about the real power in these words. I was in China, and after coming out of China and doing ministry, I was working with a man. I won't tell you his real name. Let's call him Abraham. He went by Abraham. And after we came out of China, then we were in Hong Kong, and we were doing a little debriefing. And I had dinner with Abraham and one of my friends. And Abraham was kind of quiet, and we began to ask, Abraham, tell me a little bit about your family. And then he talked about his wife had some physical needs. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, we do a house church, and I'm an evangelist. And we meet, in different places all the time. It's a secret church. And we're in one of those provinces where there's still a lot of persecution. And he said, I was out doing evangelism, and the house church was meeting at our home. And the police came in, and they broke in, and they wanted to know who the pastor was. And so my wife said, I'm the pastor. And none of these people, they just came. I'm the pastor. They let the people go, and they took my wife down to the police station, and they beat her for 2 days. And when I came back from I do a little evangelistic route, and I go to different villages, and my wife was beat up, kind of like black and blue. And all I can tell you is, I don't know if you've ever sat and listened to someone, but in your mind's eye visualized your own wife instead of theirs. And I was starting to get really angry, and I was trying to think, what would I do if the police came to my house and beat up Teresa? And I'm thinking words like, God, would you forgive me for what I'm about to do? And inside of me. And I was waiting for what happened and how he was going to respond. And then his eyes got kind of watery. And he turned to me and said, what an honor it was that we would be privileged to suffer for our Savior in some small way, in the way that he suffered for us. And all I have to tell you is I thought, that is not the response that was going through my mind. This was a man that understood the power of not taking his own revenge. Then he talked about praying for those policemen, that they would come to know Christ, praying for those policemen that their response to that injustice would cause them to see the reality of Jesus. And I will tell you, throughout church history and all around the world today, there's nothing more powerful. We are never more like God than when we give people what they don't deserve, when we give good instead of evil. And you know that question I had, like, where did Paul get these crazy ideas? I have to tell you, he got them directly from Jesus. I want to read a passage that if you've grown up in the church, or actually if you're an American, these words are literally the most radical words that have been ever uttered by a human being on this planet. I mean, before Jesus said these words, before they became common, before you could ever read them on a plaque, these were almost crazy words of treating your enemy with good in exchange for evil. I mean, even the Jewish culture, it was very clear: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It was retribution. It was justice. Listen to the words of Jesus and imagine hearing this for the first time. In fact, imagine if you really believe this with regard to the mate that walked out on you, with regard to the boss or the business partner that, put you through the ringer, with the person who gossiped about you, with the person who betrayed you. Listen to Jesus' words. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Jesus taught that you're never more like God. You're never more God-like than when you give good in exchange for evil. The Hebrew concept of being a son of someone was a family likeness. And it seems impossible. In fact, think about actually obeying this. Someone beats up your wife. Someone robs you. Someone is a drunk driver and they hit one of your kids. How do you give good for evil? How in the world does Jesus expect us to do this? And here's what you got to hear. You can't, and I can't. But this is the heart of God through the very person of Jesus saying, look, follow me. I blaze the trail. Follow me on the way, on the path of giving good for evil. And He modeled it for us. I want to read another passage, and as I do, will you please bring to your mind the person that's hurt you the most in your life? As I read what Jesus did as an example for you, an example for me, I want you to think about that person or that situation that when you think of a raw deal or injustice or someone that you would love to give them back what they really deserve, I want you to think of them with a picture in your mind as I read this. Okay? Follow along. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on the right, the other on the left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes, and they cast lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself. Now I want you to think about that person that in your heart of hearts you want to get back at. They betrayed you, they hurt you, maybe they even abused you. And I want you to see a model here. This is the Creator. This is the one who made us. And they beat him, and they sneered at him, and they killed him. And his words were, and the path that he made for us was, forgive them. He let loose. He forgave them. And God says to us, Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. Here's the line, just as God also has forgiven you. See, when you really get down to it, when I get really honest, I don't want to get what I deserve. And what He's saying is, I have to do the same for others. This is the call of God. This is the path to give good for evil. And it begins with forgiveness. In fact, the very common passage that, I didn't know any of the Bible, but I did learn the Lord's Prayer. And in Matthew chapter 6, verses 12 and 13, it says, forgive us our debts. Notice, as we have forgiven our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And that's how you get delivered from the evil one. Bitterness, the root of bitterness, those feelings, those emotions, that anger that gets unresolved. The prisoner is us when we don't forgive. And if there's one question over the years people have asked me as a pastor is, I want to forgive him, but I just can't. There's a lot of bad thinking about forgiveness. Number one, forgiveness is not a feeling. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you never think about it anymore. In the book, I really spend significant time walking through this process, but let me give you sort of the cliff notes. First of all, forgiveness is a choice. You don't have to feel anything. I mean, it's a willful choice. I drive a stake. I willfully choose to forgive this person for, and you fill it in and you're specific. And some people that I've worked with, that's been abuse and family situations, they often have had to sit quietly and write out 3 or 4 or 5 pages of specific things where they've been wounded. And they either never sent the letter or they couldn't send the letter because the parent who maybe abused them is dead now. But they got it out, they got it clear, and then they said, God, I'm going to extend to this person all this pain and all these wounds, the forgiveness that you extended me. That's a choice. That's forgive. Second is a process. That's ongoing. And my mind and my will chose to do this, but my emotions are way back there. My emotions every time when, you exchange the kids and they show up late and they don't pay the child support, or you drive by that building where you got laid off and other people that were friends with the boss didn't get laid off, and that bitterness or that hurt comes up. The process of forgiving is you bless, you pray for. I was deeply betrayed many, many years ago, and I had anger fantasies. I had little pictures in my mind of me telling this person off and them looking bad and me looking good, and I wanted them to be like in a car wreck but not get hurt really badly, but like a long recovery. And it was terrible, and I was a prisoner, I was a pastor. And a guy sat down and he said, look, Chip, you forgave, it's a choice, but now it's a process. And every Lord's Supper, I started to pray for this guy. Every time an emotion would come up, I prayed for him and I blessed him. And it got to, God show him the error of his ways, to, Lord, bless his marriage, help him to be a great dad. Lord, use him in a great way. I didn't always feel like it, but I'm telling you, I did that. I never took the Lord's Supper without praying for him. And at times when I struggled, I prayed for him very, very often. And little by little by little, my emotions began to align with my will and my choice. And more I realized what God had done for me, and I couldn't hold it over someone else, and it was the grace of God that did it. And I'll never forget the day when I heard something good about him. The first time I heard it, I did what Christians do. Oh, that's great. Down deep I'm thinking, bummer. I still wanted him to get what he, quote, deserved. And then I knew my forgiveness wasn't done. And it was probably about 4 or 5 months later, I heard something good about him. And my immediate response was, great. And then I knew I had, you forgive, forgiving, forgiven. God had sealed the deal. I didn't have to pray for him anymore. In fact, later I got an email and I was in town and he said, I'd like to get together and get a cup of coffee. And I sat across from him, eyeball to eyeball. And I realized no bitterness in my heart. And I realized he made a mistake. And I realized how many I've made. I want you to know that God wants to set you free from the anger and the bitterness and the pain towards your ex-mate or your ex-boss or your mom or your dad or the kid that betrayed you. And I want you to know that you'll never ever be more like Jesus, and you'll never be a greater testimony to the world than when you give people good for evil. Are you ready to start that journey? This might be a delicate time. I'm going to ask you to be more open and more vulnerable. I'm going to ask you as a group to remember anything that is shared in this group stays in this group. We never pass it on to anyone else. And there's going to be some wounds that get opened up in a few minutes, and there's going to be some balm of healing and grace like you've never experienced if you're willing to get it out there, to make the choice to forgive, and then start the process of forgiving. Now I'm going to give you a couple questions to get you started. Are you ready? Here's the question. I want you to actually share with one another that wound, that hurt. Who is it that hurt you or wounded you, and how are you dealing with it? What does God want you to do in light of what you've just heard to give good for evil? How will you begin the forgiveness process? Have you got it? And I want you to share it with one another. And as you do that, will you please remember that just because you forgive, it doesn't mean that you just throw your hands up and there aren't consequences. You know what? If it has to do with child support or there may be a legal issue, read Romans chapter 13. It will tell you that the government has a role to bring about justice, but in your heart, you forgive. But when you work through some of these issues, get wise pastoral counseling about how to deal with some of those extraneous issues. I want to give you some time to share it. Take your time, be open from the heart, and I've got some final comments that are very important, and I'll be back right after your discussion time. As we close our time together, I just wanted a couple minutes to say two things. Number one, thank you. Thanks for allowing me and we at Living on the Edge to be a part of your world for 6 weeks. And number two, here's my plea. Let's make a difference. You know, where do we go from here? It's not we had a Bible study. Where we go from here is becoming R12 Christians. Are you ready? Let's go for it.